Nigel Farage just exposed the most disgusting theft from British pensioners in modern history, and Keir Starmer is directly responsible right now at this very moment. Millions of elderly people who worked their entire lives, who paid into the system, who did everything right, are being robbed of £2,000 each. This isn't an accident. This isn't a policy error. This is deliberate, calculated theft from the most vulnerable people in our society. And Farage just tore Starmer apart over it in the most devastating takedown you'll ever see. The numbers are staggering. £2,000 taken from each pensioner. Multiply that by millions of elderly people across Britain, and you're looking at billions of pounds being stolen from those who can least afford it. Money that was supposed to be protected, money that people relied on for their retirement, money that was promised to them in exchange for decades of contributions. Gone. Taken by a government that claims to care about working people while robbing the elderly blind. Farage didn't just point this out. He went for the jugular. He had the figures, he had the evidence, he had the testimony from pensioners whose lives are being destroyed by this theft. And he presented it all in a way that made it impossible for Starmer to hide or deflect or spin his way out of responsibility. The confrontation was brutal. Farage demanded to know how Starmer could look pensioners in the eye while stealing their money, how he could claim to have any moral authority while presiding over the systematic robbery of elderly people who can't fight back, how he could sleep at night knowing that his policies are forcing pensioners to choose between heating and eating because £2,000 has been taken from them. Starmer had no answers. He tried the usual political tricks, blaming the previous government, talking about difficult decisions, claiming this was necessary for economic stability. But Farage destroyed every excuse, pointed out that this government found billions for foreign aid, found billions for net zero vanity projects, found billions for housing illegal immigrants, but can't find money to honour promises made to British pensioners who paid in their whole lives. The hypocrisy is staggering, and Farage made sure everyone understood it. The reaction from pensioners across Britain is fury unlike anything we've seen. People who've never been political in their lives are writing to MPS demanding answers. Elderly voters who supported Labour are saying they'll never vote for the party again, because this isn't just about money, though. £2,000 is devastating for people on fixed incomes. This is about betrayal, about being lied to, about working and saving and contributing your whole life only to have the government steal from you when you're too old to fight back. Right now, millions of pensioners are at risk. The £2,000 theft is just the beginning. Because once they've gotten away with this, once they'll do it again, they'll take more, they'll erode pensions further. They'll come up with new excuses to steal from the elderly until there's nothing left. And Farage is the only one with the courage to call it what it is: robbery, theft, a disgrace that should end political careers and send people to prison. What you're about to discover is exactly how this pension robbery works, who's affected, how much they're losing, and why Keir Starmer is directly responsible for the biggest theft from British pensioners in history. The pension scandal that Farage exposed is complex in its mechanics, but simple in its impact. The government has changed the rules around pension taxation in a way that specifically targets elderly people who saved responsibly throughout their working lives. These aren't wealthy people, these are ordinary workers who put money aside each month, trusting that the tax treatment of pensions would remain stable, that the deal they were offered when they started saving would be honoured when they retired. But Starmer's government has ripped up that deal, changed the rules retroactively, and the result is that millions of pensioners are now losing an average of £2,000 each. Some are losing more, some slightly less, but the average works out to around £2,000 per person. Money they were counting on, money they need to survive, money that's being taken from them to fund government spending they never approved. Farage laid out exactly how this works in terms anyone can understand. When people paid into their pensions, they did so under specific tax rules. The government encouraged pension saving by offering tax relief on contribution. People were told that if they saved responsibly, they'd have a comfortable retirement. Millions of British workers believed this promise. They sacrificed current consumption to save for the future. They trusted the system. And now that they're elderly and dependent on those pension earnings, the government is changing the rules to claw back money. The tax treatment has been altered. Allowances have been reduced, thresholds have been frozen, while inflation erodes their value. The result is a stealth tax that hits pensioners disproportionately hard. And for people on fixed incomes, £2,000 is absolutely devastating. The human impact is what makes this so unconscionable. Farage presented testimony from real pensioners whose lives are being destroyed by this policy. An 80-year-old woman who worked as a nurse for 40 years. Saved diligently, did everything she was supposed to do. Now she's losing £2,000 and it means she can't afford to heat her home properly in winter. She's facing the choice between being cold or going into debt. At 80 years old, after a lifetime of service to the NHS, a 75-year-old man who worked in manufacturing put money into his pension every month for decades. Retired, expecting modest but adequate income. Now he's losing £2,000, which means he can't afford the medications he needs. He's having to choose between his health and his financial survival. These aren't abstract statistics. These are real people whose lives are being ruined by Starmer's pension robbery. Farage asked the question that Starmer couldn't answer. Why are you targeting the elderly? Why are you taking money from people who can't fight back, who've already worked their whole lives, who are too old to go back to work and earn more? The cruelty is staggering. If the government needs money, there are plenty of other places they could get it. They could cut foreign aid. They could stop funding vanity projects. They could reduce the bloated bureaucracy. They could stop housing illegal immigrants in hotels at enormous expense. But instead, they chose to rob pensioners, the most vulnerable, the least able to absorb financial shocks. And Farage made crystal clear that this choice reveals everything about Starmer's priorities and values. The financial numbers are staggering when you scale them up. £2,000 per pensioner. Multiply that by approximately 12 million pensioners in the UK. You're looking at £24 billion being taken from elderly people. That's not a rounding error. That's not a minor policy adjustment. That's systematic, large-scale theft from one demographic to fund government priorities that don't benefit them. And Farage pointed out that this 24 billion could have been found elsewhere. The government wastes far more than that on ineffective programmes and bureaucratic bloat, but they chose to take it from pensioners because the elderly are politically easier targets. They're not as organised, they're not as loud, they're more likely to suffer in silence. The calculation was cynical and disgusting. Starmer's defence was pathetic and Farage tore it apart systematically. Starmer claimed that pension taxation needed to be reformed to ensure sustainability, that difficult decisions had to be made, that everyone needed to contribute to fixing the economy. But Farage immediately exposed this as nonsense. He pointed out that pensioners already contributed. For 40 or 50 years, they paid taxes and national insurance. They built the system that Starmer is now managing into the ground. They've already done their part, more than their part. And now in their final years, when they should be able to enjoy the fruits of their labour, they're being robbed. The idea that they need to contribute more while billions are wasted elsewhere is morally bankrupt. The comparison Farage drew was devastating. He contrasted what's being taken from pensioners with what's being given to others. £2,000 stolen from each elderly person who worked their whole life. Meanwhile, illegal immigrants arriving on boats with no right to be here are being housed in hotels at £100 per person per night. Federal. Given spending money, provided legal representation at taxpayer expense, the average cost per illegal immigrant is tens of thousands of pounds per year. Money found easily, money spent without question. But for British pensioners who paid in their whole lives, nothing but theft and betrayal. The injustice is so obvious, so grotesque, that it needs no elaboration. Anyone with a conscience can see it's wrong. Farage also exposed the lie that this is about economic necessity. He showed that the government has increased spending in numerous areas, hired more civil servants, expanded the bureaucracy, spent billions on consultants and diversity officers and programs that produce nothing of value. The money is there, it's just being spent on everything except the people who built this country, pensioners who worked in factories and hospitals and schools, who raised families and paid taxes and contributed to their communities. They're being sacrificed so that government can continue its wasteful spending and virtue signalling. The priority structure revealed by these choices is morally repugnant. The political calculation behind targeting pensioners is transparent and cynical. Starmer's team clearly believed that elderly people wouldn't fight back effectively, that they could steal from this demographic without major political cost, that pensioners would grumble but ultimately accept it because what choice do they have? This reveals a contempt for elderly voters that should end political careers. These are people who've seen Britain through wars and economic crises, who built the modern welfare state, who created the prosperity that younger generations enjoy. And they're being treated as acceptable collateral damage in Starmer's political and economic schemes. The disrespect is staggering. The implementation of this pension robbery reveals even more disturbing details. The government didn't announce this openly and honestly. They didn't put it in their manifesto. They didn't campaign on taking £2,000 from each pensioner. Instead, they buried it in complex tax code changes, used technical language that obscured the real impact, hoped people wouldn't notice until it was too late. This is government by deception, implementing policies that would never have been accepted if presented honestly. And Farage exposed this dishonesty brutally. He showed how the government tried to hide what they were doing, how they used bureaucratic complexity to obscure the theft, how they hoped to get away with it before people realised what was happening. The timing is also significant, and Farage highlighted this. The pension changes are hitting right as energy costs have skyrocketed. Right as food prices have exploded, right as the cost of living crisis is devastating people on fixed incomes. So pensioners are facing multiple financial attacks simultaneously. They're paying more for heating and food and other essentials. And now they're losing £2,000 from their pensions. The combined impact is catastrophic. People who were managing financially are now in crisis. People who had modest but adequate retirement incomes are now facing poverty. And the government knew this would happen. They knew the timing would compound the damage. They did it anyway. The regional impact varies, but the pain is universal. In some parts of the country where living costs are lower, £2,000 represents several months of basic expenses. In other areas, it's less, but still devastating. For pensioners in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, the impact is just as severe as in England. This is a nationwide robbery affecting elderly people across Britain, regardless of where they live. Farage made clear that this isn't a London problem or a regional issue. This is a national scandal affecting millions everywhere. And they all have one thing in common. They're victims of Keir Starmer's cruel and dishonest government. The health implications are particularly disturbing. Many pensioners use their retirement income to pay for medical expenses not covered by the NHS medications. Private treatments for conditions where NHS waiting lists are too long. Mobility aids, home adaptations for disability. Losing £2,000 means many elderly people can no longer afford these things. So their health will deteriorate, their quality of life will decline. Some will die earlier than they would have with proper care. This is what Starmer's pension robbery actually means in practice, not just financial hardship, but literal threats to their health and life. And Farage didn't let him forget it. Asked him directly how many pensioners would die because they couldn't afford heating or medications after losing £2,000. How many deaths is Starmer willing to accept to fund his other priorities? The intergenerational aspect is also worth noting. These pensioners are often providing financial support to younger family members, helping with grandchildren's education, assisting adult children who are struggling financially, contributing to family expenses. When you steal £2,000 from a pensioner, you're not just hurting them, you're hurting their entire family. The ripple effects spread across generations. And the social cohesion that comes from older generations helping younger ones is damaged. Farage pointed out that the government is destroying family support networks to fund bureaucratic bloat and virtue signalling. The long-term social damage is incalculable. The psychological impact on elderly people is severe and often overlooked. These are people who grew up in an era when you trusted the government, when you believed that if you worked hard and saved responsibly, you'd be okay. Having that trust betrayed in their final years is devastating. Many pensioners talk about feeling abandoned, feeling like they don't matter, feeling like the country they worked for their whole lives has thrown them away now that they're old. This isn't just about money. It's about dignity and respect and the social contract. And Starmer has shattered that contract. The emotional toll this takes on elderly people who already face isolation and declining health is cruel beyond measure. The opposition's failure to address this earlier is also worth noting. Farage pointed out that he's been warning about attacks on pensioners for months. But other opposition parties were slow to pick up the issue. They didn't make it a priority. They didn't fight hard enough to protect elderly voters. And now millions are suffering. This represents a failure of the entire political class, not just Starmer. Though Starmer bears primary responsibility for implementing the policy, other politicians failed in their duty to stop it. Farage is now doing what should have been done months ago, making this the central political issue, demanding accountability, giving voice to millions who feel forgotten. The legal questions around this pension robbery are interesting. Can the government legally change pension taxation rules retroactively in ways that harm people who made decisions based on the old rules? Some legal experts argue this might violate legitimate expectations or constitute effective expropriation without compensation. Court challenges are being prepared. Class action lawsuits are being discussed. The government might face legal consequences for what they've done. But legal processes take time, and while lawyers argue pensioners are suffering now, they need immediate relief, not promises of eventual justice. Farage is demanding the government reverse this policy immediately, return the £2,000, honour the promises made, do the right thing, even if it means admitting error. The electoral implications are enormous. Pensioners vote. They vote in high numbers, and they're a large demographic, millions of them. If even a fraction turn against Labour because of this robbery, the electoral consequences will be severe. Marginal seats will flip. Safe seats will become competitive. The Conservative Party and Reform UK are already making this a central campaign issue. They're promising to reverse the pension robbery if elected. They're presenting themselves as the defenders of elderly voters against Labour theft.